interesting to examine the whole range of particular discourses the people drew on in either defending capitalism as the only viable system that works or that worked for them, and then of course the discourses they used to argue that capitalism does not work for them.
Right.
They don't attribute it necessarily to capitalism, as we know that they attribute it to immigrants stealing the jobs, people crossing the border from Mexico, the government. Government's not, government is the problem. So they have adopted all these not only racist discourses, but of course the neoliberal discourses started by Thatcher and Reagan. People were expected to proverbially pull themselves up by the bootstraps. If you didn't make it in society, it's your fault, you're a loser. Look at all the people who made it, if you didn't make it, you're a loser. And then, growing up, I heard, countless stories, both on a personal level from family members and then in textbooks of the typical hardscrabble American, born poor, like Abraham Lincoln, grew up in a log cabin and then rose to become president of the U.S. Sure. So it's very interesting that what was called the kind of American dream has been kind of folded within this broader frame of that neoliberal citizen. But I was dealing with people who, for the most part, from what they were saying about their lives, were clearly not in power. And yet they still defended capitalism, even though they were not, part of the 1% multimillionaires. So the dilemma really arose for me on how to actually engage with these people who, though they did not substantially benefit in any meaningful way from capitalism, still defended it, without disparaging their views, without adopting a superior position. And I found it extremely difficult. The challenge, I think, is that for a number of reasons, and it seems to be very interestingly close parallel developments both in Europe and the US, and to some extent in East Asia, but how the political right, I would say starting with Thatcher perhaps, and then Reagan, but they've been able to mobilize these particular discourses that have gained such powerful traction that I have not seen until recently with the candidate Senator Bernie Sanders, but even he was not effective all the time because he refused to talk about anything other than just class. Where what you might call the left, which is in the U.S. is not really the left, but were unable to develop any discourses to dislodge those powerful right-wing discourses. So, in terms of social linguistics, I think this is part of that project where I think one of the important directions is to develop, I'm trying to search for the right word, either a framework, approaches, methodologies, through ethnographic explorations of how to actually develop those powerful counter discourses that would become, as I argued in my last book, the new common sense in terms of Gramsci. So I think that's an important contribution that social linguistics needs to look at. Well, I guess I would, the question I would ask myself is kind of just building on what I've just mentioned, is that going back to the Italian philosopher Antonio Gramsci, where his idea or vision, as it were, all those years he spent in prison during the Mussolini regime, where he was reflecting on really how and why the Italian left failed to stop the rise of fascism. And his stance was, I think, is so even increasingly relevant to our times, where he was loath to dismiss the people's attitudes and comments, and so his idea was this: that the good sense, the critical good sense, was contained in the seeds of common sense. So the question I would ask myself, though, is how do we actually develop ways to mobilize those seeds of good sense within that common sense.